Friends, imagine for a moment a secret held for centuries, buried deep beneath the earth, waiting for the right time to reveal itself. What if I told you that archaeologists have just unearthed something so profound, so utterly breathtaking, it could compel us to re-examine not just ancient history, but the very foundations of our Christian faith? This isn't a theory from a dusty old book. It's a tangible physical discovery found not in the grand cathedrals of Europe, but in the humble, sun-drenched soil of Galilee, right where the story of Jesus and his first apostles truly began. Prepare yourselves, because this incredible find may just change everything we thought we knew. For generations, scholars, theologians, and devout pilgrims have grappled with one of the New Testament's most enduring mysteries, the precise location of Bethsaida. This wasn't just any village. It was the cherished hometown of three of Jesus' closest disciples, Peter, Andrew, and Philip. Mentioned multiple times in the Gospels, a place where miracles unfolded, Bethsaida seemed to vanish from history, leaving behind only fragmented legends and unanswered questions. But now, after centuries of silence, on the serene northern shore of the Sea of Galilee, a dedicated team of archaeologists has pulled back the veil, revealing not just a hidden village, but a 1,500-year-old Byzantine church that whispers tales of its long-lost past. A message etched in time, the Mosaic revelation. Imagine the hushed awe of the archaeologists as they carefully brushed away centuries of mud and debris. What they uncovered in the very heart of this ancient Byzantine church, untouched for 1,400 years, was nothing short of miraculous. A mosaic floor so perfectly preserved it could have been laid yesterday. And within its delicate geometric frame, an inscription in coined Greek gleamed with astonishing clarity. This wasn't just a random text, it was a profound declaration. The inscription refers directly to St. Peter, not merely as an apostle or a devoted follower, but as the chief of the apostles, and even more remarkably as the bearer of the keys to the kingdom of heaven. This isn't merely poetic language. This phrasing resonates deeply with the words of Jesus himself in Matthew 16:19, where he declares to Peter, "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven." To find such an explicit affirmation, etched in stone in what is very likely Peter's own hometown, centuries before many of our modern theological debates even began, is truly extraordinary. The sheer preservation of this mosaic floor is a testament to time's curious embrace. Its lines are crisp, its letters sharp, its message untouched by the erosion of ages. It's as if Providence itself shielded this message, waiting patiently for our generation to uncover its profound meaning. Dr. Craig Evans, a renowned expert on the historical Jesus, has noted that this could be the clearest archaeological link to Peter's home ever discovered. And Dr. Stephen Notley, the co-director of the El Araj excavations, captured the essence of the moment perfectly. It's not just about the mosaic, it's about what it confirms. The church, the town, the people. It's all aligning now. To fully grasp the monumental significance of this moment, we must first journey back in time and understand why the story of Bethsaida has remained one of the greatest mysteries in biblical archaeology for so long. Bethsaida, a lost city found, and its enduring meaning. This incredible discovery at El Araj offers a profound practical meaning for all of us, especially as we reflect on our faith and its historical roots. It's one thing to read about these sacred places in the Bible, but it's an entirely different experience to see a tangible link, a physical confirmation rising from the very soil of the Holy Land. The church at El Araj, likely built in the 5th or 6th century, wasn't placed by chance. Early Christians, much like us today, held deep reverence for the places where God had moved, where his divine story unfolded. They built intentionally over sites they remembered, over places they believed carried a sacred memory. Think about it. The Church of the Nativity stands in Bethlehem, marking Christ's birth. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre rises in Jerusalem, commemorating his crucifixion and resurrection. And now, perhaps, Bethsaida, long debated, long forgotten, has reemerged with similar markers of sacred remembrance. The people who built that church didn't have modern archaeology or GPS. What they had was living memory, oral tradition, and a powerful sense of spiritual geography. They knew where to build because the memory of what had happened there, the presence of Peter, Andrew, and Philip, had not yet faded from their communal consciousness. The remains at El Araj confirm a vibrant first-century life, with coins, ceramics, tools, and structures all pointing to a thriving fishing village, a place with real people, real stories, and undoubtedly real apostles. And rising above it all, a church dedicated not just to any figure, but to Peter, the man to whom Jesus said, "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven." But the inscription goes further. It doesn't simply honor Peter, it calls him the chief of the apostles. The Greek word used, koryphaios, is not ambiguous. It implies leadership, headship, a place of preeminence among the 12. It identifies Peter as the one who stood above the rest, not by mere chance, but by divine appointment. And consider this, the inscription wasn't crafted in Latin, nor did it originate from Rome. It was written in Greek, laid into a mosaic floor by Byzantine Christians long before the Great Schism that divided East and West. This is incredibly important because it tells us that the idea of Peter's primacy, his unique authority among the apostles, was not a later Roman invention. It was already deeply embedded in the thought and worship of the early undivided church, both in the East and in the West. Then, perhaps most striking of all, is the second title, Holder of the Keys to the Heavenly Kingdom. This isn't poetic metaphor or liturgical decoration. It's a direct, unmistakable reference to Matthew 16:19. This very verse has served as a cornerstone of Catholic theology for centuries, signifying the moment Jesus bestows upon Peter a profound spiritual authority. It's been cited in councils, debated during the Reformation, and defended in catechisms. And now it has been found inscribed in stone in Peter's own homeland by people who lived centuries before many of those theological battles even began. This discovery may not prove the modern papacy as we know it today, nor does it demand a specific Catholic belief from every viewer. However, what it undeniably does is anchor the traditional interpretation of Peter's unique role in deep historical soil. It reminds us that the idea of Peter as a visible head within the early church was not merely a political consolidation in Rome, but a belief so strong, so early, and so widespread that it was literally written in stone in the very region where Peter lived and fished. For those of us who are not Catholic, this isn't necessarily a challenge to our faith, but it is a profound invitation to consider. Could the continuity of this belief, spanning centuries, empires, languages, and liturgies, be so easily dismissed? Or does it beckon us toward a deeper reflection, not just on Peter himself, but on the nature of leadership, authority, and unity within the church that Jesus founded? This discovery doesn't force a conclusion, but it certainly presents a question that cannot be ignored. What began as a routine excavation on the shores of Galilee has blossomed into a moment of profound significance, a place where faith, history, and scripture meet in ancient stone. The mosaic unearthed at El Araj is far more than just an artifact. It is a clear, confident message from the past, preserved against all odds. Its words affirm not only Peter's name, but his role, his authority, and the deeply held conviction of early Christians. This isn't just about geography or archaeology. It's about the continuity of belief spanning empires, centuries, and continents, now confirmed by the very earth where it began. In a time when many questions arise about the reliability of sacred tradition, this simple inscription stands as a quiet thunderclap, a powerful reminder that the early church remembered more than we thought and preserved more than we imagined. As one reader eloquently put it, it's the most important thing I've read since the moon landing, because in that powerful moment, the past wasn't just remembered, it was revealed. And now we are left with a fundamental question, not of whether it happened, but of what we will choose to do with this profound new knowledge. History and faith have collided, and the dust, my friends, is still settling. Delving deeper into Bethsaida, O historical journey. To fully appreciate the gravity of the El Araj discovery, we must understand the long and often frustrating quest to find Bethsaida. Its name, meaning house of the fishermen in Aramaic, perfectly suited its identity as a bustling fishing village. This was the vibrant home of men whose lives would be forever transformed by a Galilean teacher. The Gospels paint a vivid picture of Bethsaida as a place of profound miracles, where Jesus restored sight to the blind, Mark 8:22, where thousands were fed with just a few loaves and fishes, Luke 9:10-17, and where Jesus himself walked nearby on the surface of the water. Yet Bethsaida also holds a somber distinction as one of the few cities Jesus explicitly condemned, uttering the chilling words, "Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the miracles that were performed in you had been performed in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago." Matthew 11:21. After this ominous pronouncement, the town gradually fades from the New Testament record, and soon after from history itself. During the Middle Ages, pilgrims eager to walk in the footsteps of Christ sought its location, guided only by fragmented legends and devotional traditions. However, no real consensus ever formed. It seemed the earth had simply swallowed the town, taking with it a crucial piece of the Gospel's physical geography. In the 19th century, German and American researchers proposed Et Tel, a prominent mound nearly 2 kilometers inland from the Sea of Galilee, as a possible site. However, this choice presented significant challenges. The considerable distance from the water was puzzling for a fishing village. More importantly, Et Tel largely lacked clear first-century Roman remains that would firmly place it in the time of Jesus. For a village whose inhabitants were fishermen, its inland location simply made little sense. The real turning point came after the 1967 Six-Day War, when the region became more accessible to archaeological exploration. Israeli surveys began to highlight a far more promising candidate, El Araj, a low-lying area much closer to the Sea of Galilee. Fragments of pottery, glass, and mosaic began to surface, hinting at sustained human occupation over many centuries. But it wasn't until the early 2000s that attention truly surged, largely thanks to a visit from Pope John Paul II. He was flown over the region and personally greeted by the excavation team, who presented him with a replica of an ancient bronze key discovered at the site, a gesture rich in symbolism, subtly alluding to the authority of Peter and the promise in Matthew 16. By 2016, a formal archaeological team, backed by institutions including the University of Nebraska at Omaha, launched a full-scale excavation at El Araj. Within their very first season, they found clear traces of a Roman-era presence, including coins and tools dating precisely to the 1st century CE. This was a crucial breakthrough. By 2018, their meticulous excavations had uncovered not just isolated artifacts, but the foundational structures of a substantial Byzantine basilica, as well as remnants of a bathhouse, guest rooms, and a larger public complex. This suggested a site of considerable importance, consistent with a major pilgrimage destination. And then the inscriptions began to emerge, unveiling the church. Layers of history and faith. Beneath layers of Galilean soil, under centuries of silence and the ebb and flow of seasonal floods, lay a sacred structure, carefully hidden from the eyes of history. It waited patiently while kingdoms rose and fell, while empires came and went, while maps were redrawn and faith traditions divided. Then, in 2016, spades met stone. The excavation at El Araj began with many questions, but it quickly began to yield profound answers. Within weeks, archaeologists unearthed the substantial foundations of a Byzantine church resting upon even older Roman layers. This provided a remarkable vertical timeline of worship, devotion, and continuity at the site. What emerged was not simply a place of prayer. It was a sprawling complex containing a church, a bathhouse, and what appeared to be an ancient hostel or monastic guest house. This infrastructure perfectly aligns with what one would expect at a significant site visited by early Christian pilgrims. And this is where the written word, preserved in stone, spoke volumes. 3 separate Greek inscriptions were found embedded within the mosaic floor of the church. 2 were fragmented and harder to decipher, but one, preserved in near perfect condition, carried the full weight of 1,000 years of theology in just a few lines. Within an elegant circular frame of tessellated stone, the inscription reads, "The whole work of paving the diacon with mosaic was done by the zeal of Constantine, servant of Christ, for the chief of the apostles and holder of the keys of the heavenly spheres, St. Peter. Intercede for him and his children." This isn't poetic metaphor or vague devotional language. This is precise liturgical and theological language. It doesn't call Peter simply a disciple or a saint. It names him chief of the apostles, a title unequivocally implying not equality, but authority and preeminence. And it refers to him as holder of the keys, a phrase that directly echoes Christ's words in Matthew 16:19 and is deeply rooted in the messianic imagery of Isaiah 22:22, where keys represent dynastic succession and exclusive stewardship. The use of such exalted language is not coincidental. It reflects what the early Byzantine Christians believed not just about Peter, but about this very location. Even more astonishing is how perfectly this discovery aligns with the testimony of Willibald, a Bavarian bishop who in 725 AD recorded staying overnight in a church in Bethsaida dedicated to Peter and Andrew. His writings describe a site by the water, with facilities for guests and an atmosphere of sacred commemoration. For decades, Willibald's account was treated with suspicion, dismissed by modern scholars as pious exaggeration or a romanticized retelling of pilgrim life. But now, with the church, its layout, and the very dedication stone all matching his description, the seemingly quaint text of a medieval traveler becomes something far more powerful: eyewitness evidence. The church beneath the soil did more than preserve names and prayers. It preserved memory. It preserved belief. And in doing so, it hands us something extraordinarily rare in biblical archaeology: a direct bridge between textual testimony and physical reality. And that bridge leads us into a far more pressing question: not just what this place is, but why it truly matters. Because once we confirm the site, we must ask what it confirms. Why this matters, the keys, the kingdom, and the enduring debate. It's one thing to uncover the ruins of an ancient church, but it's something else entirely to find that church constructed directly over a first-century village, a village that aligns with the Gospels in both location and story, a village that may very well be the hometown of Peter, Andrew, and Philip. This isn't poetic coincidence or pious myth. This is historical continuity rising from beneath the soil, a sacred memory preserved not just in scripture, but in stone, in architecture, and in the communal traditions of the early church. The church at El Araj, likely built in the 5th or 6th century, was not placed arbitrarily. Early Christians didn't scatter churches randomly across the landscape. They built intentionally over places they revered, over places they remembered, over places they believed God had moved in a special way. We see this pattern throughout the Holy Land. The Church of the Nativity stands in Bethlehem over the cave believed to mark Christ's birth. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre rises in Jerusalem over the traditional site of his crucifixion and resurrection. The Church of the Annunciation in Nazareth commemorates the angel's message to Mary. And now perhaps Bethsaida, long debated and forgotten, has reemerged with similar markers of sacred memory. The people who built that church did not have access to modern archaeology, GPS, or carbon dating. What they had was living memory, oral tradition, and a profound sense of spiritual geography, a closeness not only in time, but in trust. They knew where to build because the memory of what had happened there had not yet faded. The remains at El Araj confirm that first century life flourished there. Coins, ceramics, tools, and structures all point to an active, thriving fishing village. This was not just a possible location. It was a place with real people, real stories, and perhaps real apostles. And rising above it all, a church not just dedicated to any figure, but to Peter, the man to whom Jesus said, "I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven." That alone would be extraordinary. But the inscription found within the church goes further. It doesn't simply honor Peter as a saint or an apostle. It calls him chief of the apostles, a title not of casual respect, but of profound theological conviction. The word used, koryphaios, is not ambiguous. It implies leadership, headship, a place of preeminence among the 12. It identifies Peter as the one who stood above the rest, not just by chance, but by divine appointment. And consider this. The inscription wasn't crafted in Latin. It didn't come from Rome. It wasn't part of a later papal claim. It was written in Greek, laid into the mosaic floor by Byzantine Christians long before the Great Schism, in a region closer to the apostles in both time and place. This is incredibly important because it tells us that the idea of Peter's primacy, his unique authority among the apostles, was not a Roman invention. It was already embedded in the thought and worship of the early undivided church, both in East and West. And then, perhaps most striking of all, is the second title, Holder of the Keys to the Heavenly Kingdom. This isn't poetic metaphor or liturgical decoration. It is a direct reference to Matthew 16:19, a verse that has served as a cornerstone of Catholic theology for centuries. It's the very moment where Jesus gives Peter authority, spiritual, binding, enduring. This verse has been cited in councils, debated in the Reformation, and defended in catechisms. And now it has been found inscribed in stone in Peter's homeland by people who lived centuries before many of those theological battles even began. This doesn't prove everything about Peter's role in the modern church, but it proves something very important. It proves that Peter's unique role was recognized, honored, and proclaimed across Christian traditions long before the theological lines were drawn. It shows us that in the land where Peter fished and followed, the early church remembered him not as just another apostle, but as the one chosen to lead the keys, the kingdom, and the enduring debate. For nearly 2,000 years, the role of Peter has stood at the very center of Christian identity and at times division. Critics of the Catholic position often point to Matthew 18:18, where Jesus appears to extend the authority to bind and loose to all the apostles, suggesting that Peter was not uniquely privileged, but rather a representative of the collective. And it's true, the other apostles were indeed given authority. But what they were not given were the keys. That detail matters more than it first appears. In ancient times, keys were powerful symbols of stewardship and exclusive access, not just to physical places, but to delegated royal power. To hold the king's keys was to wield his authority in his absence. This symbolism is deeply rooted in the Old Testament, particularly in Isaiah 22:22, where God says of Eliakim, "I will place on his shoulder the key of the house of David. What he opens, no one can shut, and what he shuts, no one can open." This passage has long been understood as a foreshadowing of Christ's ultimate authority, and of the one to whom he would entrust a portion of that authority. The parallel is unmistakable in Matthew 16, and the connection is profoundly strengthened by what we've now found at El Araj. Because this archaeological discovery shows that the interpretation linking Peter to singular authority and succession was not a later theological innovation, nor was it confined solely to Roman Catholicism. It was widely embraced by the early Byzantine Church centuries before the rise of medieval papal structures and long before the East-West split. In this one powerful inscription, we see the convergence of scripture, tradition, and memory, a tangible confirmation that even in the Galilee, Peter's role as keeper of the heavenly keys was revered and acknowledged. No, this find does not definitively prove the modern papacy, nor does it demand a specific Catholic belief from non-Catholics. But what it does undeniably is anchor the traditional interpretation of Peter's unique authority in deep historical soil. It reminds us that the idea of Peter as the visible head of the church is not simply the product of a political consolidation in Rome, but rather a belief so strong, so early, and so widespread that even in the very region where Peter lived, it was written in stone for generations to see and believe. And for non-Catholics, this is not necessarily a challenge to faith, but it is a profound invitation to consider. Could the continuity of this belief, spanning centuries, empires, languages, and liturgies, be dismissed so easily? Or does it invite a deeper reflection, not just on Peter himself, but on the nature of leadership, authority, and unity within the church that Jesus founded? This discovery doesn't force a conclusion, but it certainly presents a question that cannot be ignored. The quiet thunderclap, a message for our time. What began as a routine excavation on the humble shores of Galilee has blossomed into a moment of profound significance, a discovery where faith, history, and scripture meet in ancient stone. The mosaic unearthed at El Araj is far more than just an artifact. It is a clear, confident message from the past, preserved against all odds. Its words affirm not only Peter's name, but his role, his authority, and the deep conviction that early Christians held. This isn't just about geography or archaeology. It's about the continuity of belief spanning empires, centuries, and continents, now confirmed by the very earth where it began. In a time when many questions arise about the reliability of sacred tradition, when the origins of our beliefs are often scrutinized, this simple inscription stands as a quiet thunderclap, a powerful reminder that the early church remembered more than we thought and preserved more than we imagined. As one reader eloquently put it, "It's the most important thing I've read since the moon landing." Because in that powerful moment, the past wasn't just remembered, it was revealed. This discovery invites us all, regardless of our specific denomination, to marvel at the intricate tapestry of history and faith. It challenges us to look beyond modern divisions and to grasp the common threads of belief that united early Christians. It underscores the importance of historical context in understanding sacred texts and traditions. And perhaps most importantly, it offers a tangible connection to the very earliest days of Christianity, reminding us that the figures we read about in the Gospels were real people in real places, whose lives and beliefs shaped the spiritual landscape that continues to influence us today. The meticulous work of the archaeologists, the patient uncovering of layer after layer, has gifted us with a clearer window into that distant past. They have not only unearthed stones and mosaics, but they have also illuminated a profound theological understanding that was prevalent in the early church. The fact that such a significant declaration about Peter's role was made in a Greek-speaking church in the Byzantine East, rather than solely originating from Latin-speaking Rome, speaks volumes about the widespread nature of this belief in the undivided church. This is a testament to the power of archaeology to bring the past to life, to make the abstract tangible. It reminds us that history is not a static collection of facts, but a living narrative, constantly being enriched and at times reshaped by new discoveries. The dust has settled on the mosaic, but the implications of its message are still reverberating across the globe, inviting renewed contemplation and dialogue among believers and scholars alike. It's a call to look again, to read again, and to understand more deeply the rich tapestry of Christian history. And now, my friends, we are left with a fundamental question, not of whether it happened, but of what we will choose to do with this profound new knowledge. History and faith have collided, and the dust, my friends, is still settling. What new insights will you take from this extraordinary revelation?